Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of One Soccer Direct. Mackenzie Barwell, Gareth Wheeler, and Alex Gonge-Ruzic with you. We are starting today's episode with some less than fortunate news, you guys, surrounding Moise Bombito. We knew, going into the World Cup, he was struggling with an injury. Now we have news out of France that Canada's top center back requires yet another surgery on a tibia that he fractured, over a year ago now? Wheels, how concerning is it to you that Bombito continues to struggle with this recovery?
Very concerning, not just because of the notable leg break, which happened last October, but he was suffering from a stress fracture in that same tibia before. So this seems to be a persistent issue. And for a 26-year-old who was just emerging as a real talent, not only with the national team, but for Nice as well, this is just another setback, which you really feel really terrible for the guy. But right now, it's not a situation where anyone should panic around this scenario. It's just we don't have enough information. We know from Bombito's perspective, he's feeling persistent pain in his tibia, that he's almost feeling like an electric shock in his leg, the tingling sensation, the discomfort whenever he jogs or runs. So that needs to be rectified right now. But what's causing the issue seems to be rather unclear. Until you get to the bottom of it, it's very difficult to press the panic button. So instead, you just need to practice patience for the time being and hope that he turns the corner and he's able to continue on that same trajectory that he was. But right now, just as an outsider, that assessment's looking rather bleak. And you just feel for the player at a moment like this. Someone that was willing to sacrifice themselves to a certain degree by playing through pain to play in a home World Cup, now sees himself facing a prolonged spell on the touchline as well. I know we'll get into what should have been done or how it was handled, but the initial reaction is one of pessimism, although it just cannot be approached as doom and gloom at this point.
Yeah, well, it just sucks for in this case because, look, all injuries suck. It's never great to go through a leg break or an ACL tear or any sort of long-term injury, but especially in the modern game, this isn't 20 years ago where an injury like this, it's a career ender. We see it. Guys come back from it all the time. Even just this specific injury, Tajon Buchanan, we forget, suffered it 2 years ago. And since then, it's been nothing. It's been a clean bill of health. He's been back to himself. So for when an injury like this happens to Moise Bombito and it lingers, and it sticks around and there's issues, it's just surprising because you don't see that a lot in modern medicine. So you feel for the player because it's the worst feeling when you're constantly coming back and you're never at 100%. And, there's lingering issues with how his leg's feeling. You have to do a whole other surgery. Basically almost 10 months after the first surgery. It's brutal in that regard because it also has just come at such an unfortunate time for Moise Bombito. Last season was all supposed to be about Moise Bombito's breakout at the club level, continue into a big World Cup. And I'm sure if all was right, he could have made a big move this summer if all was well. Now you're sitting here back to hitting the reset button, just trying to get out on the field again and show that he's still going to be able to be himself. So you just feel from the player on that regard because lingering injuries like this are so much worse than, a one and done where you're back to yourself once it's done.
Well, it signals that something's wrong. And that's why I don't think we can compare him to Tajon Buchanan anymore. Initially, that's what Jesse Marsh did. But clearly this injury and the fact that it's been persistent now. He had the stress fracture before, then he broke his leg, and then clearly he wasn't right going into that World Cup, and he was able to play through it. So the fact that there's an acknowledgement now, I think tells us that this situation is much different. And that's why it's that much more concerning, because there are cases where there could be an underlying issue here that either hasn't been disclosed or properly diagnosed right now. Scans can show that a bone is healed, but just in terms of like any nerve damage or any persistent other issue around that, that raises significant concern. And now he's on the balance of it, going to lose 2 seasons in his absolute prime at the age of 25 and 26. Less than ideal to say the least, but it's part of sport. Injuries happen. It's just the recurring nature of this and the persistent nature that really casts and looms like a large shadow here.
Yeah, and Gareth, you mentioned him essentially sacrificing himself to be able to play for Canada at the World Cup. And we knew, as I said, it was obvious he was struggling going into that tournament. Like everybody remembers the video of him limping off the field during the pre-World Cup friendly in Edmonton, what, after like less than 30 minutes of playing. At that time, we thought it would be pretty much impossible for Jesse Marsch to select him for that 26-man roster. Yet it happened. He did it. AGR, upon reflection now, in hindsight, do you feel it's even more surprising that Marsh selected him, even after, Bombito admitted to feeling that continuous lingering pain?
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising if you're looking at it from like a staff perspective, a medical staff or a coach perspective. Because look, from Moise Bombito's perspective, and we always have to remember this, he was going to make this decision every time for a World Cup. As soon as that decision's in a player's hands, they'll play through pain. They'll play through, the lingering effects of a leg break. And, the fact that Bombito's going through surgery now, and he played 90 minutes against Morocco and South Africa and 59 against South Africa and held his own. Credit to him and his toughness. But ultimately, when you look at that happening, that for me goes to the coach and the medical staff of, can you do right by a player? It's a complicated one because especially in a case like this, it's more of a, how are you feeling, right? Like it's not something like a ligament or a muscle where you can kind of, there's scans for this sort of stuff where ultimately you look at it and it's the decisions made. It seems for this one, it was more just a pain management thing. And Bombito is probably thinking, I'm just going to grip my teeth and worry about it later. So that's, again, where you look at the coach and the medical staff of, can you take that agency away from the player and decide what's best for him? Because ultimately when it's a World Cup, especially a home World Cup, a player that this could, I think Moyes Bombito hopefully will play at the 2030 World Cup. And who knows, defenders age differently, could play in 2034. But in his mind, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking, can I play in this World Cup the here and now? He's not going to make the same decisions as someone else. And that's expected as a player. So again, for me, it falls to the staff to try and manage that.
It's a tough one because there's no evidence as of right now that by playing in the World Cup, it created, a worse scenario, made the injury worse and brought us to this position. We could be in the same position if he didn't play whatsoever. But at the same time, like, I'm very old school when it comes to this sort of thing, that old school sports fan where you appreciate and you understand that players are going to play through injury. Like very rarely are athletes anywhere near 100%, but they're still going out there and performing and not making excuses. But at the same time, with an injury like this, it was surprising to me that he was part of the World Cup squad because he simply didn't look right. In video that was released by Canada Soccer, Bombito, in his own words, was like pleading with Marsh to give him another chance and declared it like an act of God, essentially, allowing him. It was God's decision to allow him to be fit enough to be part of the World Cup squad. And now this happens. So he probably doesn't approach it with any kind of regret. But if you're Canada Soccer, there may be some conversations being had about whether they did the player right. Because as much as you're looking to see if the player is available short term, it is now in 2026 the responsibility of staffs, whether for club or country, to do what's best for the player long term as well. Mm-hmm. So look, there's no perfect science. There's no perfect answer behind this. The players will versus, potentially long-term harm or damage. It's a difficult one, especially surrounding a home World Cup. I do appreciate Bombito, his commitment, the fact he was willing to sacrifice, to represent Canada, to represent this nation at a home World Cup. I think he can have, hold his chin up high, but now unfortunately he has to deal with the long-term repercussions from it. But this is just the next chapter in what has been, the Canadian medical team and the staff and the decisions that they've made being put very much in the spotlight. Right or wrong, that's just the realness of the story right now. It's the reality of the situation. And, the Davies situation certainly highlighted one thing. And then when you're dealing with another significant European club in Nice, and what's going on with Bombito, I'm sure that there's still going to be some questions asked. And this may be something that lingers over and around the Canadian national team moving forward. It's always an issue, club versus country, but there might be a little bit more sensitivity when it comes to player availability and preference, just based upon situations like this.
Yeah, this has been a consistent theme, and we've been asking the question for the past year and a half or so of who will step in for Moise Bombito. And now that we're kind of back to square one and he'll be out for a period of time, obviously for this upcoming window in October, then potentially, obviously, November's Nations League. Gareth, any predictions on who we might see replace Bombito at the back?
Well, I think that this is Luke de Fougerol's job. I mean, he like the trajectory, what he showed, the fact that you do want to bleed in younger players and give them more responsibility as you build towards and within a new World Cup cycle. There's no doubt about that. I'm sure that Alfie Jones will play a role now that he's back fit and playing. I think he played significant minutes against Doncaster in the EFL Cup this past week. So he looks like he's moving in the right direction. I don't think you bring Jones to a World Cup when he hadn't played football in 2026 if he wasn't part of the longer term plan. So I think that he steps in. Jamie Knight-Labelle's playing regular football with Motherwell. He stepped up from League Two, now playing in the Scottish Premier League and playing Europa League qualifiers as well and playing some significant minutes. And at 21 years of age, he seems like a player who's knocking on the door. And if you're Marsh, he's had him in camps before. You want to be able to see what he can do when it comes to the national team as well. So some sort of combination of Knight-Labelle, Luke de Fougerol, maybe will provide a little bit more of a glimpse for the future. And I think that right now, to be honest with you, Mac, like that should kind of be the priority.
Yeah.
It's not just about like balancing things out, like saying thank you to players that with experience that have done a job for this country. It's about looking forward as well and finding potential solutions, because now Bombito, whether it's short-term or long-term, there's still questions about how he will be able to perform and whether he'll have to be managed a little bit more. So bring in the young kids. And also a decision needs to be made in AGR's own backyard. Is Ralph Priso really part of the picture? And if he is, you know, there's a need for midfielders now too, with a glut of injuries for Canadian players. Is he more part of the center back plans or the central midfield plans? And I think in Marsh's eyes, he might be preferable to play in the midfield. So I think there's some big decisions that need to be made about who fits where within the national team.
Bring in the young kids, AGR.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had hope after this World Cup we'd see a lot of Moise Bombito and Luke de Fougerol together. I still have hope down the road that's a partnership we're going to see grow and play together. But for now, this just means de Fougerol steps up. But the kid has proven to be ready, so why not give him the keys? And then it's just a matter of what can you do around him? Is Alfie Jones? I mean, a Jones de Fougerol, a little bit of English, flair there. Guys, a bit of experience, a bit of
flair.
I know, right? Ironic that I'm putting it. But to be fair, Luke plays with flair. De Fougerol does, he's got a little flair for an English guy. Jones maybe a bit more old school. Knight-Labelle is a great shout. For the Priso one, I'm happy you mentioned it because I was going to talk about it. For me at the Whitecaps, he's one of their top two center backs right now in fit. So I think we're going to see a lot of him at center back. And we have to remember how good he looked before the injuries in the summer. I think he would have made that World Cup squad if not for that unfortunate hammy issue he got at BMO when he got the start against Tunisia. I think we're going to see some Ralph Priso at center back. His left-footedness is going to be a good asset. Him and Derek Cornelius on the left, Jones de Fougerol on the right. You try to mix in a Knight-Labelle. All of a sudden, that's still a decent center back group, even if Bombito is not fully fit yet. So I still think you got options. This position's not what it used to be a few years ago, where you're just looking for warm bodies playing in a decent league to step up and improve the position.
Okay, you guys, before we wrap up, I have to ask whether Bombito's need for another procedure after all this time caused you to rethink the way Alphonso Davies handled his return to play during the World Cup, or even how Canada Soccer should approach Ismail Kone's situation as he returns from his broken leg wheels?
It's a great question, Mackenzie. I, for one, had no problem the way that Alphonso Davies handled his injury and his status at the World Cup. What I did have a problem was the decoy, the gamesmanship, just the lack of clarity in terms of messaging coming from Jesse Marsh and Canada Soccer at that time. I think they put Davies in a vulnerable position. I'm not sure it was intentional on their behalf, but certainly it could have been more concise, more direct, which I think would have put the player in a better position from a public perception about where he was at and what the expectations actually were. So whether it's with Ismail Kone or Alphonso Davies or any other player going forward, no games, no gamesmanship, no decoys, none of that nonsense. Just be straight. Like, I just think that with the sensitivities around these players, the way that they're perceived and their future careers, they need to be handled with the utmost care and respect. Like internally, they're clearly respected by the national team and their teammates, but I just think that things were a little bit too cute, and just that there's no room for error when it comes to these things anymore. The way that things are perceived and reacted. So yeah, moving forward, Ismail Kone is a great case study. Like you can't mess around about this. He's even younger than Moise Bombito. He's got a lot of time to recover for games that really, really matter. So I think that really needs to be handled with care, as does Bombito moving forward. And their health is paramount and priority to even have them into consideration to play for Canada come the biggest and most important games in the not so distant future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to Wheels, your point, Alphonso Davies ended up catching some flack after the Morocco game for not featuring and saying that, his body didn't feel right, which, is a decision that ultimately as a player, you can only he could make, only he knows what he's been through. And considering the fact that he's since come back to Bayern and not started any games and has been eased back in, it makes you realize, okay, he really wasn't as far along as we were kind of almost made to believe, with the fact of he's going to play in the group stage, he's going to play here, and this constant stream. So that's also another aspect, I guess, to add to your point. For the players at large, it's all about the future, right? Like, obviously, you want Alphonso Davies, Ismail Kone, Moyes Bombito, all these guys on the field as soon as possible. But from a Canadian perspective, those are still three key pillars for the 2030 World Cup, which for me is your long-term goal. Obviously, there's a lot of short-term goals. Do I want all three starting in a Nations League final next spring if you make it that far? Absolutely. But if that's something you must sacrifice so that in 2030 they're healthy, still in their prime, still at their absolute best, that's a sacrifice I take. I can live with not having a full strength squad at Nations League or, Gold Cups and the start of World Cup qualifiers, as long as the focus is all on the long term, especially because Canada has the depth. Like, this isn't a team that's desperate to need these guys. Yes, they're better with them, but this is a different program where a Kone goes down, so the Salibas and the Seegers step up. Davies goes down. It was Larea last year. Now there's other youngsters who can step up. Bombito goes down. We talked about the center backs. This is a different program where you don't need to rush these guys either.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's crickets now from the people ridiculing Alfonso for not playing in that Morocco game, because now, in hindsight, maybe that was the right call, especially as he eases his way into the season with Bayern. But again, Canada's Moise Bombito sidelined, so we'll see how the team fares. Maybe some depth will be showcased. Maybe the kids will come out to play as soon as September 26th when Canada faces Chile at Toronto Stadium.